A dark boardroom. A 22-year-old, $1 billion on the table. A cross. Powerful investors. He simply said, "We're not selling." This isn't just business. It's the beginning of a revolution. The story of Mark Zuckerberg, the boy who bet everything to connect the world.
Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, the man who connected billions. A young Mark Zuckerberg sits in a small boardroom, the glow of a projection screen reflecting in his eyes. On the screen is a number 8 million users, the number of people already on Facebook in mid-2006. Across the table, venture capitalists stare at the 22-year-old CEO, papers in hand. It's a $1 billion acquisition offer from Yahoo. The room is tense. One board member clears his throat. "Mark, this is a lot of money. Maybe we should consider it." Zuckerberg, wearing his signature hoodie, doesn't flinch. He leans forward, determination in his voice. "This is just a formality," he says calmly. "It shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. We're obviously not going to sell here." His board is stunned. To them, it seems unthinkable. How do you turn down $1 billion at barely 22 years old? But Mark sees something they don't. In his mind, he pictures a map of the world lit up with connections. Millions, eventually billions of people, all linked through his platform. Selling now would mean giving up the chance to connect everyone. He takes a breath and explains his reasoning. Yahoo doesn't understand what Facebook could become. They're undervaluing us because they can't see the future features and growth we envision. He argues. Around the table, some investors still exchange worried glances, but Mark's conviction is unshakable. He's willing to face this impossible trade-off, money versus mission, and he chooses mission. In that moment, a young founder risks everything to stay the course, driven by a vision to connect the world. It's a bold gamble, one that will define his life's work. How did a college kid with a computer in his dorm room reach a point where he'd defy billionaires and refuse a king's ransom to keep his dream alive? This is the story of Mark Zuckerberg, a story of ambition, vision, ethical dilemmas, and the drive to connect every person on the planet. It's a journey from a Harvard dorm to the heights of global influence, filled with strategic insights, hard lessons, and the relentless pursuit of a mission. This is Mark Zuckerberg connecting the world. The dorm room genesis. It all began in a cramped Harvard dorm room in the fall of 2003. Mark Elliott Zuckerberg, then a 19-year-old sophomore, was known around campus as a quiet computer prodigy. He had a mischievous streak and a love for building things quickly. A program called Face Mash. With a few hours of furious coding, he hacked together a site that pulled student ID photos from Harvard's databases and asked users to vote on who was hotter. It was impish, inappropriate, and wildly popular. So popular, in fact, that it crashed Harvard's network within hours as students rushed to check it out. The reaction from the Harvard administration was swift. Mark found himself in hot water, charged with breaching security, violating copyrights, and infringing privacy by using students' photos without permission. He faced the possibility of expulsion. In a public apology, the usually reserved teenager admitted he messed up. Harvard's student paper blasted the site as completely improper, and outraged classmates demanded it be taken down. The university disciplinary board considered severe penalties, but in the end, Mark caught a lucky break. The charges were dropped and he was allowed to stay. The incident could have been the end of his college career. Instead, it became a spark. Mark had tasted what it was like to build something that grabbed people's attention, and he wasn't about to stop. In January 2004, barely 2 months after the Face Mash fiasco, Mark set his sights on a more ambitious project. Harvard, like many colleges, distributed a printed Facebook, a directory with names and photos of students. Mark imagined a digital version an online network for Harvard students to connect and share. With his reputation as a skilled coder, and perhaps with something to prove, after FaceMash, he dived into creating the Facebook. He enlisted a few friends, Eduardo Savarine, Dustin Moskovitz, Chris Hughes, and Andrew McCollum, who shared his excitement. They hacked away in their dorm rooms, fueled by caffeine and vision. On February 4th, 2004, the Facebook com went live from Mark's Kirkland House dormitory. Harvard students could now create profiles, list their interests, post photos, and friend each other online. A virtual campus social directory born in a matter of weeks. The service caught on like wildfire at Harvard students, who had once only known Mark as the FaceMash troublemaker, now flocked to his new site. Within 24 hours, over 1,000 Harvard students had signed up. Classmates could suddenly keep up with each other's lives online, rekindling acquaintances or sparking new friendships from the comfort of their rooms. It was intoxicating, a glimpse of the social connectivity that Mark was envisioning on a larger scale. One of Mark's roommates later remarked that everybody on campus was talking about the Facebook. It just took off, but as the site's popularity grew, so did complications. Just 6 days after launch, a knock came at Mark's door. Not college administrators this time, but 3 Harvard seniors, Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss and Divya Narendra. The trio claimed that Mark had agreed months earlier to help them build their own social networking site, but instead, he'd stalled their project and built his own using their idea. In their eyes, Mark had swiped their concept. They were furious. And soon this dispute would escalate into lawsuits that would dog Zuckerberg for years. To Mark, however, the Facebook was his baby. He had written the code and crafted the product himself. The Winklevoss twins and Narendra went to the campus newspaper and even the courts accusing Mark of intellectual property theft. It became a high-profile feud. Mark, intensely focused on expanding his new platform, now faced the distraction of legal challenges and ethical questions about the genesis of his idea. Eventually, the fight with the Winklevosses would be settled, but it foreshadowed a pattern that would follow Mark. Blazing new trails often means stirring up controversy. Still, in that spring of 2004, even as controversy brewed, Mark's priority was growth. He had a vision of connecting people and nothing, not angry rivals, not Harvard classes, which he increasingly neglected. Not even his own social awkwardness would derail him, with Harvard students hooked. Mark and his small team opened the Facebook to students at other elite universities. First came Stanford, Columbia, Yale, then Boston University, NYU, MIT. They carefully added one campus at a time, nurturing a sense of exclusivity and excitement. By the end of spring, tens of thousands of college kids were on the Facebook, and Mark was watching his creation expand beyond the ivy-covered walls of Harvard Yard. That summer, Mark decided to drop out of Harvard. It was a bold move, but in his gut, he knew that the project he started was bigger than a college hobby. Along with Dustin Moskovitz and a few teammates, he moved to Palo Alto, California, the heart of Silicon Valley, to work on Facebook full-time. They rented a modest house, a makeshift hacker headquarters, and got to work. The house became the stuff of legend code, sprawled on whiteboards, pizza boxes stacked high, and a young crew of idealists working around the clock. Mark was in his element, often coding in the early hours of the morning, determined to improve the site and roll it out to more users. One of those fateful summer days, a visitor arrived at their Palo Alto rental. Sean Parker, the co-founder of Napster, who had heard about Facebook's momentum. Parker saw in Zuckerberg a younger version of himself, brimming with potential. He became an informal advisor and later Facebook's first president. It was Sean Parker who supposedly urged Mark to drop the and just call it Facebook, making the brand cleaner. More importantly, Parker helped introduce Mark to Silicon Valley's investor circles. Peter Thiel, a billionaire who co-founded PayPal, became Facebook's first major investor in 2004, injecting $500,000 in venture capital for a small stake and a seat on the board. Suddenly, Mark went from a college kid with a cool website to the CEO of a startup with real funding and real expectations to grow. The social network expands. By 2005, Facebook no longer just the Facebook was spreading through colleges across the United States like a brush fire. Mark and his team expanded the network's reach beyond the Ivy League, opening it to hundreds of campuses, nationally and even internationally. The user count climbed steadily into the millions. In a world before social media was a household term, this was a phenomenon. College students were using Facebook to do everything from arranging study groups to finding weekend parties. Zuckerberg's mantra was growth, and he poured his energy into scaling the platform fast, often repeating the hacker slogan, "Move fast and break things." That mindset meant pushing out new features quickly, worrying about perfection later. It created an aura of scrappy innovation around Facebook, but it also meant sometimes barreling headlong into controversy. One of the earliest big tests of Mark's strategy came in September 2006, when Facebook introduced the news feed. At the time, Facebook was still a closed network mostly for students, and users were accustomed to visiting friends' profiles manually. Newsfeed changed that by broadcasting everyone's updates in one stream on the homepage. Overnight, a Facebook user could suddenly see in real time that Alice became friends with Bob Carroll. Changed her profile picture, Dave joined the chess club group. To Mark and his team, this was a brilliant innovation to boost engagement, an automated way to keep everyone looped in. But to many users, it felt like a betrayal. They woke up to find their personal activities splashed on the feeds of all their contacts by default, with no privacy controls initially. The backlash was immediate and intense. Within 48 hours, hundreds of thousands of irate students banded together in a Facebook group called Students Against Facebook Newsfeed to protest the change. For many, newsfeed felt like stalking, a creepy window into their lives that they hadn't agreed to. The media started asking if Zuckerberg had overstepped. Facing a user rebellion for the first time, Mark did something he'd have to get used to in the years ahead. He apologized. In an open letter to the community, the 22-year-old CEO admitted, "We really messed this one up. We did a bad job of explaining what the new features were, and an even worse job of giving you control of them." He promised privacy settings to let people manage what info was shared on the feed. This was a formative moment. Mark learned that connecting people sometimes meant bumping up against privacy boundaries. But importantly, he didn't roll back the newsfeed. He improved it and pushed forward. In time, users came to love the feature. It became the heart of Facebook's experience. This pattern would repeat. Facebook's bold changes often met criticism. Mark would adjust just enough to satisfy concerns, and then watch as the world eventually embraced what Facebook built. It was a delicate dance between innovation and intrusion, and Zuckerberg was at the center of it, even as Facebook grew. Mark's single-minded focus on expansion remained. In 2006, he made a momentous decision. Facebook would no longer be just for students. On September 26th, the network opened registration to anyone over 13 years old with an email address. Suddenly high schoolers, then everyone else could join the party. The platform's population ballooned beyond campuses into the mainstream. Some early users grumbled that the vibe had changed, but Mark's eyes were on the bigger picture. A Facebook in every home on every screen. He was famously quoted saying, "Facebook's mission was to make the world more open and connected." To achieve that, he couldn't stay a closed club. As the user count exploded, so did the valuation and the stakes. In 2007, Microsoft invested $240 million in Facebook for a tiny 1.6% stake, implicitly valuing the company at a staggering $15 billion. Facebook, still just 3 years old, was now one of the hottest tech companies on the planet. At 23, Mark Zuckerberg was lauded as a wunderkind. Time magazine put him on its cover, and by 2008, he became the world's youngest self-made billionaire. The comparison with his early rival MySpace became clear. Facebook's relentless innovation and Mark's focus on real identity and clean design helped it surpass MySpace by 2008 as the most used social network. The era of pastel-colored MySpace pages with music blaring gave way to Facebook's crisp blue and white interface and real-name profiles. The world was beginning to understand that Facebook wasn't a passing fad. It was redefining how humans connect. Yet amid this whirlwind success, Mark faced an internal crossroads in mid-2006, that dramatic boardroom meeting we saw in the opening. Yahoo came knocking with a $1 billion offer to buy Facebook. Many around Mark urged him to take it. The company was still young and unproven in revenue. $1 billion was an eye-popping sum for a startup with only $20 million in revenue at the time. Mark's own board members were inclined to sell, but Mark's conviction prevailed. He flat-out rejected Yahoo's offer, shocking many in Silicon Valley. In that tense meeting, Mark started by saying it would be quick because we're obviously not going to sell. He argued that Yahoo didn't properly value things that did not yet exist, namely, the future of Facebook. Facebook was on the cusp of launching major features. Why sell out now and forfeit the chance to build those things that did not yet exist? This decision was high stakes and controversial. At the time, pundits thought Zuckerberg was foolish or arrogant for spurning such an offer. It wasn't yet clear that Facebook would dominate globally. Facebook's path to massive profits was uncertain, but Mark's gamble was rooted in a steadfast belief in his mission and product. As he later explained, he simply thought Facebook could grow much bigger and that he was the one to do it. He wasn't in it for a quick payday. That gamble paid off more than anyone could imagine, with Facebook's valuation later soaring to multiples of Yahoo's entire value. But it also set the tone. Mark would prioritize long-term vision over short-term gains again and again. Under Mark's leadership, Facebook kept expanding features and reach. He hired top talent to fill gaps in his own experience. Notably, in 2008, he brought on Sheryl Sandberg, a former Google executive, as Facebook's chief operating officer. This partnership would be crucial. Sheryl complemented Mark's product genius with business savvy, helping turn Facebook's enormous user base into a sustainable business. She focused on building an advertising platform and scaling operations, while Mark kept his eyes on the product and engineering side. It was a dynamic duo, often likened to the hacker and the adult in the room. Mark was maturing into a CEO who understood he needed seasoned partners to conquer the world stage. By 2010, Facebook reached 500 million users and was weaving itself into the fabric of global communication. Zuckerberg, at 26, was named Time's Person of the Year for changing how we all live our lives. The social network he started had grown from a dorm room project into a worldwide phenomenon. Families used it to stay in touch. Businesses used it to reach customers. Activists used it to organize rallies. Mark's creation was no longer just connecting college buddies. It was connecting humanity in ever more profound ways. That year, a Hollywood film, The Social Network, hit theaters dramatizing Facebook's early days and Mark's persona. The movie painted Mark as an obsessive, sometimes ruthless genius, fixated on outdoing rivals and earning status. While critically acclaimed, it took artistic liberties. Upon being asked about the film, Mark famously quipped with dry humor that the movie got a lot wrong, but at least they got the t-shirts right. In reality, Mark was uncomfortable with how the film portrayed him as driven by a desire to get into elite social clubs or to impress a girl. In his view, it was always about the mission. Despite any hurt feelings, the movie only heightened Zuckerberg's fame. Imagine a 26-year-old tech CEO had a major motion picture made about his life. But Mark shrugged it off and went back to work. He knew the real story of Facebook was still being written by him vision on a global scale. In October 2012, Mark wrote a short post that reverberated around the world. Facebook just hit 1 billion users. In less than 9 years, the platform had gone from one dormitory to connecting 1 out of every 7 people on the planet, 1 billion. It was a milestone that even Mark in his boldest dreams hadn't foreseen happening so fast. Helping 1 billion people connect is amazing, humbling, and by far the thing I am most proud of in my life. Zuckerberg wrote, adding that he was committed to working every day to make Facebook better. And hopefully, together one day we will connect the rest of the world too. His pride was evident, but so was his renewed vow. He wasn't stopping at 1 billion. He wanted to connect the rest of the world. Reaching that milestone coincided with another huge event in Facebook's journey, its initial public offering. In May 2012, Mark, at age 28, stood on a stage at the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, nervously smiling as Facebook went public. It was one of the most anticipated IPOs in tech history. Facebook's opening valuation was over $100 billion, making it one of the largest in history. Mark had insisted on structuring the company so that he retained controlling shares, meaning even as Facebook became a public company, his grip on its direction remained firm. The IPO itself was tumultuous. Technical glitches marred the first day of trading, and the stock price sagged in the ensuing months, drawing skepticism about Facebook's long-term business model. Critics wondered if the young CEO could handle the pressures of Wall Street and a public company's responsibilities. Facebook's share price dipped well below its offering price, and some began to doubt Zuckerberg's leadership. Mark's response to this challenge was characteristic. He doubled down on strategy and innovation. One of Facebook's most pressing issues in 2012 was the shift to mobile. Users were rapidly moving from desktops to smartphones, and Facebook's early mobile app was clunky. Advertisers were unsure if Facebook could make money on those tiny screens. With the stock price under pressure, Mark took action. He famously pivoted the company to mobile-first, reallocating resources to improve the mobile experience. Engineers rewrote the Facebook app from scratch to be faster and more native on iPhones and Android devices. Within a year or two, Facebook had transformed into a predominantly mobile service, and the ad dollars followed. This was a testament to Mark's strategic acumen. He identified an existential threat and swiftly adapted, ensuring Facebook not only survived the transition, but thrived. By 2014, the majority of Facebook's revenue was coming from mobile ads, and the stock had rebounded strongly. Zuckerberg had convinced Wall Street that he could steer the ship after all. But Mark wasn't content with just shoring up Facebook's core app. He was always scanning the horizon for the next big wave, or the next potential competitor that could distract users from Facebook. In this spirit, he made a series of bold acquisitions that would define Facebook's empire and extend its reach far beyond the original website. In April 2012, even before the IPO dust settled, Mark shocked the tech world by announcing Facebook would acquire Instagram for about $1 billion. Instagram, at that time, was a small startup, just 13 employees, but it had amassed a fast-growing user base keen on sharing photos with cool filters. Importantly, Instagram was mobile-only and was siphoning away some of the youthful creative sharing that might have otherwise happened on Facebook. Many saw Instagram as a threat to Facebook's dominance in social sharing. Mark acted swiftly. He met Instagram's founder, Kevin Systrom, and over just a couple of days, hammered out the acquisition deal at his home, personally offering an eye-popping price that Systrom couldn't refuse. Observers were stunned. $1 billion for a tiny company with no profit? Some called Mark crazy or reckless, but Zuckerberg saw what others didn't yet. Instagram could either become Facebook's greatest threat or its perfect complement. As he later put it, if people are going to share photos better, they do it within the Facebook family than elsewhere. Instagram's photo-centric network and youthful vibe filled a gap in Facebook's portfolio, and by buying it, Mark ensured that those users remained under the umbrella of his broader mission to connect people with hindsight. That 1B price tag looks like a bargain. Instagram grew to over 1 billion users itself and became one of the most popular apps in the world, greatly enriching Facebook's business. Mark's risky bet paid off, and it taught Silicon Valley a lesson he was willing to spend big and move fast to neutralize potential competitors and keep Facebook at the forefront. Not long after Zuckerberg set his sights on another form of connection messaging. By 2013, it was clear that billions of people, especially outside the US, were adopting mobile messaging apps to communicate. One app in particular, WhatsApp, had exploded in popularity across Europe, Latin America, and Asia. It allowed simple ad-free texting over the internet, and by 2014, WhatsApp had over 400 million users and was growing by millions more every week. Mark recognized that messaging was fundamental to connecting people. After all, Facebook's mission wasn't just about public sharing, but any way people communicate. If those conversations were happening off Facebook, his mission was incomplete. So in February 2014, Mark made another jaw-dropping acquisition. Facebook would buy WhatsApp for $19 billion. It was one of the largest tech acquisitions ever. Again, the industry was astonished. $19 billion for a messaging app with negligible revenue. But Mark saw the true value. WhatsApp was on a path to connect 1 billion people, a scale that only a few services ever reach. And the services that reach that milestone are all incredibly valuable. He explained to him, WhatsApp's rapid growth and deep engagement made it worth the price. We're excited to partner with Jan and his team to make the world more open and connected. Mark declared, emphasizing how this fit the Facebook mission. With WhatsApp, Facebook gained a foothold in intimate private communication between friends and family across the globe, something Facebook Messenger had not yet achieved to that extent. It also showed that Mark's ambition truly had no borders. If Facebook couldn't beat a platform that was connecting people in a new way, he would buy it. And by bringing it into the fold, push that mission even further. Between Instagram and WhatsApp, and later smaller additions, like Oculus VR, Zuckerberg was assembling a family of apps that together served different modes of connection. Facebook for sharing and newsfeed, Instagram for visual storytelling, WhatsApp and Messenger for direct messaging, and Oculus for early moves into virtual reality. Each of these moves displayed strategic foresight. Mark was ensuring that as human communication evolved, whether it was shifting to mobile visual content or new mediums like VR, his company would stay at the cutting edge of facilitating those connections. Yet even as Facebook's reach extended to billions of users and multiple platforms, Mark's hunger to literally connect the whole world drove him to initiatives beyond just apps. In 2013, he launched Internet.org, an initiative aimed at bringing internet access to the 5 billion people who were not yet online. This effort saw Facebook working on high-tech projects like solar-powered drones beaming internet down to remote areas, satellite systems, and partnerships with telecom providers to offer free basic internet services in developing countries. Mark framed it as a humanitarian effort. The more people connected, the better for everyone. Connecting everyone became something of a personal mantra. He often spoke about how access to the internet could lift people out of poverty, improve education, and create opportunities. However, even this noble-seeming endeavor had its complexities and pushback. In India, for instance, Internet.org, branded there as Free Basics, offered a limited suite of websites for free, including Facebook, but not full open internet access. Local activists argued this violated net neutrality by favoring certain services. Mark countered that a limited internet is better than no internet, passionately defending the idea that some connectivity, even if curated, was a step forward for the unconnected. Despite his pleas, Indian regulators banned Free Basics in 2016, insisting that the internet should remain an equal playing field. It was a rare public defeat for Zuckerberg's connectivity crusade, but it illustrated a theme. The road to connecting the world is fraught with political and ethical landmines. Mark's idealism at times ran into the realities of different values and perspectives in different parts of the world. Meanwhile, Facebook proper kept growing. By 2015, it crossed 1.5 billion users. By 2017, 2 billion. The company was raking in profits, and those early doubts about its business model had long been put to rest by a juggernaut advertising machine. Advertisers, big and small, flocked to Facebook to target audiences with unprecedented precision, thanks to the troves of data users shared on their profiles and through their clicks. Under Mark's leadership, Facebook became not just a social network, but a global communications infrastructure. It connected friends and families. Yes, but also brands with consumers, politicians with constituents, communities with common interests, and sadly, sometimes liars with unwitting audiences. The immense scale of Facebook was revealing the double-edged sword of connecting everyone you connect, the good and the bad. Zuckerberg, still in his early 30s by the mid-2010s, stood atop one of the most influential enterprises on Earth. He was no longer the awkward college kid hacking away in a dorm. He had evolved into a leader who could hold court with heads of state popes and industry titans. Yet his fundamental mission hadn't changed. In speeches and posts, he reiterated that Facebook's goal was to bring people together. He genuinely believed, and still believes, that when you give people a voice and the ability to share, the world becomes smaller and more understanding. However, the next chapter of his story would challenge that belief like never before. Trials and tribulations. By the late 2010s, Mark Zuckerberg had connected a few billion people, but he was about to discover that connecting the world also meant grappling with the world's problems on an unprecedented scale. The first sign of serious trouble emerged not from a tech competitor or a market fluctuation, but from how people were using Facebook. The platform that had started as a place for college gossip and photo sharing had grown into a primary medium for news and information for hundreds of millions. With that came immense power and responsibility. As early as 2011, Facebook was credited with helping enable the Arab Spring, as activists in Egypt and Tunisia used it to organize protests for democracy. Mark felt proud that Facebook could be a tool for empowerment and positive social change. "This is what Facebook is all about," he remarked, as regimes toppled partly through movements that had been fueled by social media connectivity. However, the same open platform began to be exploited in less noble ways. Misinformation and propaganda found fertile ground on Facebook. In the 2016 US presidential election, false news stories spread widely, and foreign actors manipulated Facebook to sow discord among American voters. Zuckerberg initially downplayed the notion that fake news on Facebook had impacted the election outcome. Calling that idea pretty crazy, he believed the platform was just a mirror of society, not a driver of events. But as evidence mounted, it became clear that Facebook's sheer scale had made it a tool for influencing public opinion, sometimes with malicious intent. Then came the breaking point, the Cambridge Analytica scandal. In March 2018, news broke that a political consulting firm had harvested data from tens of millions of Facebook users without their consent. A personality quiz app had siphoned not just the quiz takers' data, but their friends' data too, ultimately accumulating profiles on up to 87 million users. This data was allegedly used to target political ads and influence voters in the 2016 election and other campaigns. People were outraged. It felt like a massive betrayal of trust. Facebook, the platform they had entrusted with personal moments and connections, had been careless with their privacy. Delete. Facebook started trending. Facebook's stock plunged, erasing $70 billion in market value in days. For Mark, this was the gravest crisis in Facebook's history. The world watched as Zuckerberg responded. First came a lengthy Facebook post admitting mistakes. Then Mark took the unprecedented step of agreeing to testify in front of the United States Congress. In April 2018, the public saw something never seen before. Mark Zuckerberg, in a navy suit and tie, seated at a Senate hearing, facing a firing line of tough questions from lawmakers. The image was striking. The once carefree hacker now looked every bit the CEO accountable for a global institution. For 2 days, Mark answered questions from senators and representatives, sometimes clumsily, sometimes confidently. In his opening statement, he said, "Facebook is an idealistic and optimistic company, but it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry." He acknowledged that Facebook had a responsibility to ensure what happened with Cambridge Analytica never happens again. During one exchange, an elderly senator asked Mr. Zuckerberg, "How do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?" Mark, managing a slight smile, replied, "Senator, we run ads." The straightforward answer became a viral meme, emblematic of a generation gap between tech CEOs and legislators. But behind the bit of humor lay a serious reality. Facebook's business model, targeted ads driven by user data, was under scrutiny like never before. Zuckerberg emerged from the hearings relatively unscathed in terms of immediate repercussions. Facebook didn't get broken up or heavily regulated overnight. But the scrutiny heralded a new era for him and the company. He beefed up Facebook's security and content review teams, ultimately employing tens of thousands of moderators to combat fake accounts, hate speech, and abuse. He invested heavily in artificial intelligence to automatically detect malicious content. Facebook started rolling out clearer privacy controls and transparency around advertisements. Mark promised that Facebook would do better, an echo of the many apologies he had made in the past. But now, on a much bigger stage, challenges kept coming. In countries like Myanmar, Facebook had become so dominant that for many it was the internet. And unfortunately, it was weaponized to spread hate against the Rohingya minority, contributing to a humanitarian crisis. United Nations observers warned that Facebook's slow response to hate speech in Myanmar had exacerbated violence. This was a far cry from the feel-good narratives of connecting long-lost friends. Mark was learning the hard way that connecting people could enable the spread of hatred and lies as easily as love and truth. These were ethical complexities that no startup founder handbook could have prepared him for. Every decision became fraught. How much to moderate and patrol content versus how much to allow free expression? Should Facebook take down a post that might incite violence? Should it ban a political leader for violating rules? Mark, a staunch believer in the importance of free speech, often leaned toward allowing expression, sometimes to the dismay of critics who felt Facebook wasn't acting swiftly enough to remove dangerous content. He set up an independent oversight board, a sort of Facebook Supreme Court, to review the thorniest content decisions and acknowledgement that maybe neither he nor Facebook should have sole authority on such matters. Privacy, too, became a cornerstone issue. After Cambridge Analytica, even everyday users became more aware of how their data could be misused. In 2019, Mark published a memo outlining a new vision for a privacy-focused social platform. He talked about enabling more encrypted messaging and ephemeral stories that disappear, signaling a shift in the company's approach from the old share, everything publicly ethos to a more balanced approach, including private secure communication. It was a notable evolution of philosophy, shaped by painful lessons. Regulators around the world started closing in as well. The European Union implemented strict data laws, and the US Federal Trade Commission fined Facebook $5 billion in 2019 for privacy violations, the largest fine of its kind. Though critics said it was a slap on the wrist. Given Facebook's earnings, there were calls to break up Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, arguing that Mark's acquisitions stifled competition. Zuckerberg found himself defending, in high-profile interviews and posts, why his company should remain intact, and how its scale actually helped keep users safe. Throughout these trials, Mark often appeared reflective. Gone was some of the early brashness. In a public interview, he once noted, "We need to earn back trust." He also began to more openly acknowledge Facebook's responsibility for its impact on society. This period was a crucible of leadership for him. It's one thing to build an empire. It's another to face the consequences when that empire's actions affect elections, ethnic violence, or mental health on a global scale. Mark had to grow from a brilliant programmer CEO into a statesman of sorts, navigating public policy, media outrage, and moral responsibility. There were moments of humility. He toured the country in 2017, visiting dozens of US states he'd never been to, sitting down in folks' living rooms and farms to understand ordinary users' lives. He wrote lengthy essays, practically treatises, on the future of communities and the internet, grappling in public with how to balance free expression with safety, or how to discourage polarization and echo chambers that Facebook's algorithms were sometimes accused of amplifying. Yet even as he faced criticism from many sides, Mark never lost sight of the core belief that had led him this far, that connecting people is valuable. When facing tough interviews, he'd often revert to stories of positive connections, like how Facebook allowed a father separated by military deployment to watch his child's first steps live, or how communities formed around rare diseases to support each other. He truly believed Facebook's net impact could be positive if managed right. The late 2010s were turbulent for Zuckerberg. Facebook's reputation took a hit. Employee morale wavered at times under negative press. But through it all, Facebook's usage kept growing in many areas, and the company remained immensely profitable. Mark's challenge was less about keeping the lights on. It was about steering a socio-technical behemoth responsibly. These trials, as harsh as they were, forced Mark to evolve and confront the nuances of his mission. The boy who once shrugged off privacy concerns with people just want to share more was now a man saying, "We have a responsibility to protect your data." The young CEO who built features and said, "Let's see what happens," was now commissioning research into Facebook's societal impact before launching major changes. The journey had humbled him, but it had not broken his will. Evolution of a leader. Throughout these ups and downs, Mark Zuckerberg himself was growing up. When he started Facebook at 19, he was a shy, geeky kid who often avoided the spotlight. Public speaking terrified him. He once even said his dream was to never have to do interviews. But as Facebook's figurehead, he couldn't stay in the shadows. Over the years, he trained himself to be more comfortable on stage. From early awkward interviews where he sweated so much that it became a meme to later confidently delivering keynotes at Facebook's F8 developer conferences. He learned to laugh at himself, even sprinkling in a little humor during talks. One year, he opened his keynote by joking about a past on-stage mishap, quipping, "I'm Mark Zuckerberg. I used to be human," referencing how people joked. He seemed robotic. The audience laughed with him. Bit by bit, Mark was becoming a more polished communicator. On a personal front, major life events deeply influenced Mark's outlook. In 2012, on a quiet day just after taking Facebook public, Mark married Priscilla Chan, his college sweetheart, whom he met at Harvard. Their wedding was a modest affair in their backyard. Guests thought they were coming for a party to celebrate Priscilla's medical school graduation, but were surprised with a wedding. Instead, Priscilla, a pediatrician, brought a different perspective to Mark's life, grounded, compassionate, and focused on education and health. She helped Mark see beyond the tech world. Mark often cites Priscilla as the most important influence on his values, reminding him of the human impact of his work and inspiring their joint philanthropic efforts. In late 2015, Mark and Priscilla welcomed their first child, a daughter named Maxima Max. Becoming a father was a profound moment for Mark. He took paternity leave, a notable move setting an example in the tech industry. But more famously to mark Max's birth, he penned a heartfelt open letter to her that revealed just how big Mark's vision had become. In that letter, he spoke of wanting Max to grow up in a better world and announced the Zuckerberg Initiative, through which he and Priscilla pledged to give away 99% of their Facebook shares over their lifetimes to advance causes like education, curing diseases, and community building. "Your mother and I don't yet have the words to describe the hope you give us for the future," he wrote to his newborn daughter. As you begin the next generation of the Zuckerberg family, we also begin the Zuckerberg Initiative to join people across the world to advance human potential and promote equality. This was Mark the philanthropist and idealist thinking beyond Facebook, aiming to directly tackle societal challenges. It harked back to that social mission he always talked about. Connecting people was part of it, but empowering people was the broader goal. Fatherhood mellowed Mark. In some ways, colleagues noted he became more empathetic, more patient. He even shared publicly about personal struggles, like when Priscilla had miscarriages before they successfully had their children. By speaking about that, Mark hoped to destigmatize the pain that many families go through in silence. It was a far cry from the days when his public image was just brilliant coder. He was showing more of his human side. Even Mark's once rigid management style began to soften. In Facebook's early mantra move, fast and break things, there was little room for caution. But around 2014, as Facebook grew massive, Mark altered that motto to move fast with stable infrastructure. It was a subtle but telling change, an acknowledgement that you can't break things when billions rely on you. The hacker culture Mark loved was evolving into a more mature engineering culture that balanced speed with safety. This mirrored Mark's own evolution from reckless to responsible. Mark also embraced being a leader of leaders. He surrounded himself with a strong bench of executives, not just Sheryl Sandberg, but people like Mike Schroepfer, Chris Cox, and later Andrew Bosworth and others, and gave them leeway to run major parts of the company. A sign of his maturation was his ability to trust others with big decisions. In the early days, Mark was known for weighing in on every product tweak. In later years, he focused on high-level strategy and trusted his teams. More employees described him as intensely analytical, famous for asking incisive, detail-oriented questions, even as the company scaled, but also increasingly open to perspectives that differed from his own. He convened internal forums to debate tough issues like content policy, often listening quietly to young employees challenge his stances. This wasn't something he would have done in his 20s. One quirky constant, however, was Mark's ascetic lifestyle despite his wealth. He wore the same style of gray t-shirt almost every day because he wanted to minimize trivial decisions. He kept his diet and habits simple. At one point, only eating meat from animals he personally killed. He set yearly personal challenges, learning Mandarin Chinese, building an AI to automate his home, or wearing a tie every day for a year to remind himself to take work seriously. These antics showed that despite being one of the richest people on Earth, Mark remained somewhat austere and quirky. He was more comfortable discussing AI or societal infrastructure than hobnobbing at fancy parties. In fact, he and Priscilla famously drove an average Volkswagen hatchback for years and lived in relatively modest houses. He had not turned into a flashy billionaire. If anything, he doubled down on a monastic focus on his mission. By his early 30s, Mark had grown from a hacker CEO into a global leader wrestling with social responsibility. He delivered a well-received commencement speech at Harvard in 2017 about the importance of purpose and community. In that speech, he joked about his parents finally being happy. He got his degree but then spoke earnestly to graduates. Finding your purpose isn't enough. The challenge for our generation is to create a world where everyone has a sense of purpose. This was Mark preaching what he had come to believe, that technology should serve a higher purpose in people's lives, something he sought to instill in Facebook's direction. However, he also knew words weren't enough. His actions at Facebook would speak louder. So in those years, we saw him steering Facebook to emphasize more meaningful social interactions, tweaking the newsfeed in 2018 to show more posts from friends and family, less from brands and media, to try to encourage personal connections over passive consumption. This change came at the cost of some usage time and possibly ad revenue. But Mark pushed it because he thought it was right for user well-being and aligned with Facebook's core value of connecting loved ones. In essence, Mark Zuckerberg's leadership evolution was about expanding his perspective from a coder obsessed with user growth metrics to a CEO mindful of societal impact, from a young man leading peers to a father thinking about the next generation. He retained his intensity and strategic mind, but tempered it with lessons learned. And though battered by criticism, he remained relentlessly optimistic about technology's ability to solve problems, an optimism that continued to guide his next big bets. Meta and beyond. At the start of the 2020s, Mark Zuckerberg made perhaps the boldest move since Facebook's founding. He decided that the company needed to bet its future on another frontier of technology, something that extended beyond the traditional social networking model. For years, Mark had been intrigued by the concept of the metaverse, a virtual immersive version of the internet where people could interact in 3D environments. Facebook had already acquired Oculus VR in 2014 and invested in augmented reality research, signaling his belief that VR/AR could be the next major computing platform. By 2021, he was convinced that to truly connect the world in the deepest way, Facebook needed to transform into a company that builds this next platform, essentially, to create the successor to the mobile internet. So in October 2021, Mark announced that Facebook Inc. would rename itself to Meta Platforms. The iconic Facebook brand for the company gave way to a new name reflecting a new focus building the metaverse. Right now, our brand is so tightly linked to one product that it can't possibly represent everything we're doing today, let alone in the future, Mark said. He laid out a vision where, in the coming years, people would work, play, learn, and socialize in interconnected virtual worlds via avatars. We believe the metaverse will be the successor to the mobile internet. Mark explained, "We'll be able to feel present, like we're right there with people, no matter how far apart we actually are." Renaming a globe-spanning company was a dramatic step. To many, it was also a timely one. By 2021, Facebook's brand had been bruised by controversies, and a rebrand signaled a new chapter. With Meta, Mark essentially told the world that connecting people through social media was not the end game. It was the foundation for something even more ambitious. He envisioned that in the metaverse, a person in New York and another in Nairobi could sit on the same virtual park bench and chat as if physically together. Or families spread across continents could gather in a virtual living room on holidays. It was the ultimate extension of connecting the world, making geography nearly irrelevant to human interaction. However, this new mission is not without enormous challenges and skepticism. Building the metaverse is a far more complex endeavor than building a website or an app. It involves cutting-edge hardware, new software platforms, and convincing people to spend time in virtual spaces. Mark committed billions of dollars in investment to Meta's reality labs, effectively willing to sacrifice short-term profits to chase this dream. Investors grew concerned as Meta's spending on metaverse research soared and the payoff remained uncertain. Meta's stock price fell sharply as people questioned if Zuckerberg was making a heedless gamble. But those who knew Mark well saw the pattern. He's never been afraid to bet big on the future as he sees it. Just as he doubled down on mobile, just as he paid big for Instagram and WhatsApp, he was now all in on the metaverse. Inside, Meta, Mark rallied employees around this vision. He frequently demoed early prototypes, like advanced VR goggles or research on holographic avatars, showing a childlike excitement for the technology. He even changed the way meetings were run. Meta's leadership started holding some meetings in VR, with everyone donning headsets and sitting around a virtual boardroom as avatars. Mark would be there as a cartoonish version of himself leading discussion, a hint that he truly intends to live in this future he's building. The metaverse pivot also came with an interesting side effect. It somewhat eclipsed the constant discussions of Facebook's past controversies. Mark's narrative shifted to one of innovation and building again, rather than damage control. However, he didn't abandon the existing platforms. Far from it, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp remained core to the company's revenue and mission. Mark simultaneously had to keep those services thriving, dealing with upstart competitors like TikTok by introducing features, while also steering the colossal metaverse ship. By 2025, some early fruits of the metaverse strategy are visible. Meta's VR headsets have gotten sleeker and more affordable, and millions of people use them for gaming exercise or virtual meetups. Meta launched Horizon Worlds, an early metaverse platform where users can socialize or attend events in VR. It's still nascent and sometimes clunky, but Mark logs in and interacts with regular users, gathering feedback on how to improve it. To him, this is reminiscent of the early Facebook days, a new frontier where the rules aren't written yet and where bold experimentation will pave the way. He's visibly energized by it, often saying it reminds him of when he was building Facebook in that dorm. Now he's building something arguably even more complex, yet questions remain. Will the metaverse truly be the next big thing, or will it become a niche? Is the world ready to blur the lines between physical and virtual life? Mark is betting his legacy on it. In a sense, connecting the world via social media was phase 1. Connecting the world via an immersive metaverse is phase 2. He renamed his entire company to signal that Facebook is just one piece of a larger puzzle he's assembling. A puzzle to connect people across not just distances, but realities. Today, Mark Zuckerberg stands as a leader who has been at the helm of a global enterprise for over 20 years, an eternity in tech. He's weathered storms that might have sunk others, learned from mistakes that played out on the public stage, and kept a firm grip on the company he built. He remains relatively young with potentially decades of career ahead. Often in interviews, when asked about the future, Mark still speaks with a twinkle in his eye about possibilities curing diseases through CZI, improving education with personalized learning software, or making sci-fi dreams like brain-computer interfaces a reality. His strategic drive hasn't dimmed. If anything, it's broadened. And crucially, at the heart of Mark's endeavors, whether Facebook, WhatsApp, or the metaverse, lies that same mission: human connection. The mediums may change, the scope expands, but Zuckerberg's fundamental belief is that when people are brought together and empowered to share, amazing things, and sometimes challenging things, happen. But progress is made. In the next generation, our ability to connect with each other will only grow. We have a responsibility to do it right. The story of Mark Zuckerberg is far from over. But if it teaches us anything, it's that innovation and impact come with costs, and true leadership is tested in how one responds to those costs. Mark's journey from a Harvard dorm to connecting half the globe has been one of audacity, learning, and relentless ambition. He has stumbled and risen, been both cheered as a visionary and criticized as a disruptor of social fabric. Yet Zuckerberg's odyssey underscores a powerful idea: a single individual's vision to connect the world can indeed reshape civilization in a few short years. Friends and families separated by oceans now laugh together on video calls because of the platforms he built. Communities that would never have existed now thrive online, bridging culture and distance. At the same time, societies wrestle with new dilemmas of privacy, truth, and mental health in the digital age. As we look to the future, Mark Zuckerberg is still that builder at heart, chasing the next leap in connecting people. Whether the future calls for AR glasses that project holograms of our loved ones into our living rooms, or virtual workplaces where colleagues from different continents brainstorm at the same virtual table. You can bet Mark is already coding the next prototype or sketching the architecture. He once turned down $1 billion because he believed Facebook could connect more people. And he was right. Now he's placing an even larger bet that he can create a new reality where connections are bound only by imagination, not screens. Time will judge how this new chapter plays out. But if Mark's past is prologue, we know one thing: betting against his vision has often been a mistake. The kid who connected a campus went on to connect the world. And today, armed with lessons learned and unyielding determination, Mark Zuckerberg is still pushing the boundaries of how we connect, turning the page to a future where the lines between physical and digital fade, and where the entire world truly feels within reach. Mark Zuckerberg's story is one of stunning successes and humbling failures of idealism and controversy. It invites us to ponder big questions about technology's role in our lives. But above all, it reminds us that behind even the largest social networks on Earth, there is a human being with a dream. In this case, the dream of a more connected world. As he himself said when Facebook reached its first billion users, "It's amazing and humbling, and we're just getting started."